Germany is often treated as the most credible proving ground for green hydrogen. It has industrial demand, regulatory structure, public funding, and decades of experience integrating renewables into a large power system. If green hydrogen can work anywhere at industrial scale, it should work here. That is precisely why the lesson from Germany's GET H2 Nukleus project matters. The project does not fail because of technology. It exposes something more fundamental. Green hydrogen economics are decided by grid reality long before hydrogen is produced. GET H2 Nucleus is one of Germany's early hydrogen backbone projects. It connects green hydrogen production around Lingen with industrial consumers in Lower Saxony and North Rhine-Westphalia through a hydrogen network of roughly 130 kilometers between Lingen and Gelsenkirchen. The project involves major industrial and infrastructure players, is designed for non-discriminatory access, and is intended to anchor a broader hydrogen market in one of Germany's most industrialized regions. RWE's role includes staged electrolyzer deployment at the Emsland-Lingen site, with capacity scaling over time towards several hundred megawatts. On paper, this looks like a model hydrogen project. Industrial off-takers exist. Hydrogen transport infrastructure is being repurposed rather than built from scratch. Renewable electricity is available regionally. Policy support is strong, and yet, even under these favorable conditions, the decisive variable for economics is not electrolyzer efficiency or hydrogen pipeline design. It is electricity access under real grid conditions. Germany's power system is structurally constrained. Renewable generation, particularly wind, is unevenly distributed across regions while industrial demand is concentrated elsewhere. Transmission expansion has lagged for years due to permitting complexity, political compromise, and public resistance. The result is persistent congestion. When generation exceeds what the grid can move, Germany relies on redispatch and curtailment rather than seamless power flow. Redispatch is not a theoretical concept. It is a routine operating condition. Renewable generation is curtailed in constrained areas, while conventional generation ramps elsewhere to maintain system stability. Curtailment volumes are material, and the compensation costs are passed through the system via grid fees. This is not a temporary transition artifact. It is a structural feature of how Germany's grid currently operates. For green hydrogen developers, this matters more than headline electricity prices. Electricity can exist in abundance and still be economically inaccessible. GET H2 Nucleus sits inside this reality. Electrolyzers connected to a congested grid do not operate based on average renewable output. They operate based on what the grid can deliver at that specific node, at that specific moment, under that specific dispatch regime. This is where hydrogen economics quietly break. Electrolyzers are capital-intensive assets. Their economics depend heavily on utilization. When a plant is designed for thousands of operating hours per year but is constrained by grid congestion, fixed costs dominate every kilogram produced. The levelized cost of hydrogen rises sharply, even if electricity prices appear attractive in annual averages. Curtailment is often framed as an opportunity for hydrogen, implying that surplus electricity can simply be absorbed by electrolyzers. In practice, curtailment is unpredictable, location-specific, and governed by grid rules rather than hydrogen demand. Electrolyzers cannot rely on curtailed power as a stable input. They still face network charges, balancing requirements, and operational uncertainty. What looks like cheap electricity in policy narratives rarely translates into dependable, bankable supply at the project level. GET H2 Nucleus illustrates this mismatch. Hydrogen transport infrastructure can be planned with precision. Industrial demand can be contracted, but electricity availability remains conditional. When grid constraints limit electrolyzer operation, hydrogen output becomes episodic. Storage can smooth some variability, but storage adds cost and complexity. The system accumulates financial stress faster than it accumulates hydrogen. This is the uncomfortable truth that many hydrogen models obscure. Electricity availability is often treated as a continuous variable derived from generation profiles. Grid congestion, redispatch probability, and curtailment exposure are frequently simplified or ignored. Germany's experience shows that these are not secondary effects. They are first-order economic drivers. Another misconception exposed by GET H2 Nucleus is the idea that hydrogen infrastructure can compensate for grid weakness. Pipelines move molecules efficiently once hydrogen exists. They do not solve electricity constraints upstream. Hydrogen does not bypass grid physics. It inherits them. A hydrogen backbone without synchronized power infrastructure is incomplete, no matter how well engineered the downstream system may be. Germany's regulatory framework further complicates the picture. Curtailment compensation mechanisms primarily address generators, not hydrogen consumers. Electrolyzers face network fees and market structures that were not designed with large, flexible industrial loads in mind. Price signals that look rational in theory are often distorted by regulation and practice. This makes hydrogen economics sensitive not just to physics, but to policy design. This sensitivity explains why many green hydrogen projects struggle to reach final investment decision. The uncertainty is not whether electrolyzers work, it is whether they will be allowed to operate consistently enough to recover capital. Investors and lenders understand this. A plant that cannot guarantee utilization cannot guarantee cash flow, regardless of how compelling the climate narrative may be. GET H2 Nucleus advances because it benefits from strategic priority, public support, and system-level coordination. Many commercial projects will not. That distinction matters. Germany is not showing that hydrogen is easy. It is showing how much alignment is required for it to work at all. At this point, this is where Renewable Energy directs serious developers, consultants, and investors to H2 Hub. Not as a sales pitch, but as a working environment where hydrogen projects are evaluated under real system constraints rather than idealized assumptions. Grid access, utilization risk, curtailment exposure, and infrastructure sequencing are treated as core design variables. This level of analysis is what separates technically impressive projects from economically viable ones. Germany's experience also reframes site selection. Proximity to renewable generation is not enough. Proximity to unconstrained grid nodes often matters more. A slightly higher electricity price with reliable access can outperform a theoretically cheaper supply that cannot be used consistently. GET H2 Nucleus exists in one of the few corridors where partial alignment is possible. Many regions will not have that advantage. Scale discipline emerges as another lesson. Larger electrolyzers magnify utilization risk. When grid access is uncertain, scaling up increases financial exposure faster than it increases output. Phased deployment aligned with demonstrated grid conditions can outperform flagship builds in constrained systems. Germany's cautious staging reflects this reality, even when it is not explicitly stated. Looking ahead, the German case suggests that green hydrogen competitiveness will be regional, not universal. Some grid zones will support viable hydrogen production. Others will not, regardless of policy ambition. The geography of hydrogen will be shaped by transmission topology and grid flexibility, not national strategies alone. The core takeaway from GET H2 Nucleus is not about hydrogen pipelines, electrolyzers, or industrial demand. It is about sequencing. Green hydrogen economics are largely determined before construction begins, when grid constraints are locked in and transmission timelines are set. By the time hydrogen is produced, many economic outcomes are already decided. Germany's GET H2 Nucleus is not a failure, it is an early signal. It shows what happens when hydrogen ambition meets grid reality. For developers elsewhere, the lesson is not to replicate the project, but to replicate the thinking. Model the grid first, assume congestion is structural. Price curtailment? Honestly, treat utilization as the dominant risk. Only then does green hydrogen move from aspiration to industrial reality. Until grid reality is treated as the primary design constraint, green hydrogen will remain fragile no matter how advanced the technology becomes.